Hey there, today I'm sharing with you my conversation with Mark Stromenberg from #Hope. Now, Mark is an expert in the mental health and suicide prevention field, and he and his partner Nick have set the bar high with #Hope, a world without suicide. So if you're a church leader that feels uncomfortable when conversations about mental health and suicide come up because you're not quite sure what to do with them, then you've got to stick around for this one. We're getting started right now. Hey there, my name is Mike. I'm a church helper, and my goal today is to help your church make every decision on purpose. Now, this episode is really amazing, and you're not going to want to miss the next one, so make sure you hit that like and subscribe button right now. It makes a huge difference to us over here, both as an encouragement and helps us know what information to give you next. Now, today, I'm presenting to you my conversation with Mark Stromenberg from #Hope. And as somebody who's battled mental illness himself, Mark is passionate about communicating hope and help to the 1/5 of Canadians who struggle with mental illness and to those who have a friend or a family member who is hurting as well. Through his own life, his training, and his professional experience, Mark seeks to bring the light of hope to those struggling with depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts in a holistic and practical way. Mark specializes in motivational speaking, leading educational workshops, and suicide intervention instruction. You're going to love this conversation. I know it. So you are going to get into it right now. Hey there, Mark. Thanks so much for joining today. So happy to have you here.
Oh, it's good to be here, Mike.
So we got together a little while ago and we were talking about #Hope, which is an organization that I've known about for a while, whether it was through, youth retreats or them visiting youth groups that I was leading. But why don't you tell us a little bit about #Hope and maybe the genesis, the origin story, what it's all about, and what you're really trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, #Hope started in about 2013 by a buddy of mine, Nicholas Pegg, when we were both at Bible college together. He started looking for ways to reach out and connect with people who, like him, were struggling with thoughts of suicide. And he started that really at Change Conference in Toronto in 2013. And just brought some t-shirts along that said, "It's okay not to be okay." Sold out before the first session even started.
Oh, wow.
And so he knew at that point that he was onto something, that mental health was something that people were really interested about, that young people especially were concerned about. And certainly 8 years ago, there were fewer resources available at the time. Myself, I've been speaking from my own lived experience as well on mental health and suicide for about the same length of time, coming out of the Youth for Christ, Youth Unlimited world. And about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, prior to COVID, we sat down and started talking about what would it look like to join our speaking ministries together. And that's really how the charity of #Hope was born. And so we spent the last couple of years working on that and kind of rolling things forward. Our vision is to see a world without suicide. That's huge. Mm-hmm. We knew we wanted a vision that was bigger than we could accomplish, something that will always keep driving us forward.
Cool.
And the way we do that is we speak hope and life into darkness and death, particularly in places that people are not going, and specifically through the creative arts. So that's what we've been focused on for the last couple of years. We became a registered charity almost 2 years ago, and we're looking to grow out of COVID and to continue to be able to speak in different places and provide some basic training on what to do when people are hurting or struggling, and hoping one day to open an advocacy center in Cambridge, Ontario.
Cool. So you didn't start with, like you've been with #Hope for a couple of years. What's your background? What were you doing before that kind of transitioned you into this to say, wow, this is really a wheelhouse that I might find myself in?
I've been a youth worker with Youth Unlimited for about 15 years, about 5 years volunteering on and off, and on staff for the last 10 years. And so I'm transitioning out of that. Did a lot of different kinds of youth ministry, drop-in centers, sports ministry, music ministry. But through that experience working with at-risk teenagers, I started to share some of my own journey with depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. And from there, I started getting opportunities to speak in different youth groups and a couple of conferences. One of my trainers in Youth for Christ Canada, Brett Andrews, who used to be on staff at Emmanuel Bible College in Kitchener. Him and Paul Robertson really gave me my first opportunity to speak at the Today's Teens conference for Toronto Youth Unlimited. And so from the last couple of years, that's taken up more and more of my ministry focus. And I guess by the time this comes out, I will have started my stepping out of Youth for Christ into the role of executive director for #Hope.
So so you and Nick are tag teaming this together. What's his role? What's your role? And how do you two complement each other here? Because you and I have talked to each other a little bit about that. I think it's so cool how you bring your different skills, but you're both passionate about the same thing and the same outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a co-directorship model. So he's the founder and like chief creative and outreach officer, and I'm the executive director as co-equals leading this thing. We knew that was something we wanted to do. We were told it was a dumb idea that someone needs to be in charge. But it's working really well so far. I mean, we haven't had any major conflict yet. We'll figure that out when we get there. But I think like I tend to be I tend to be more of a teacher. And Nick is just a really creative and charismatic and compelling speaker. And so I think that partnership has worked really well for us to be able to build off of each other and lean into one another's strengths. There's a lot of things I am not good at, and there's a lot of things that Nick is not good at. And so I think one of the neat things about a co-director model is it kind of puts a little bit of a damper on both of our egos. Sure. But also, kind of creates the kind of culture that we're hoping to build within the organization, a culture of leaning into each other's strengths, and really just trying to pursue the picture of like one body with many parts, each doing what they were created and designed to do to the best of their ability.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, this kind of is a new chapter for #Hope in the last couple of years. It's been around for a while. I have one of the sweaters that say it's okay not to be okay. So I'm one of those people that's helped sell those out.
Yeah, that's OG.
That's right. It's an old one. I've had it for a long time.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Right. And so talk us through a little bit because we've heard a lot about, especially through COVID, a lot about mental health and mental well-being. And there are so many different just areas and avenues to go down when we hit this topic. Whether it's, how you're doing day to day or how you're managing stress and anxiety or suicide. So how, what are you seeing right now? I suppose, what were you seeing pre-COVID and how is that changing now? As an organization, what are you noticing? And then, how are you sort of moving towards helping people deal with those types of struggles? Because I think mental health, even though it's become a bit more of a mainstream conversation, is still such a big ball to hold all at the same time. And so, how are you guys approaching it, and what does that look like, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think anyone that's worked in youth work prior to COVID already really knew the importance of mental health for young people in particular. We've always known that's been a struggle. Depression, anxiety, panic attacks, self-harm, cutting, and suicide. That's just been part and parcel of doing youth work. And those of us on the front line have known that for a long time. One of the things that COVID has done is it's really transformed other people's understanding of mental health as being not just important for somebody who is visibly struggling or is acting strangely or is hearing voices or seeing things, but that mental health is something that's important to every single one of us. We all have a brain that runs on different biochemicals, and that is affected by what happens around us, by our environment, and the people that we are with. And so I've had that conversation with a number of adults over the last 2 years of like, I knew mental health was important before COVID, but now I really understand how important it is. In terms of what we're seeing for young people, a lot of people were very concerned that we would see a sudden spike in suicides. That is not translated in the same way that people were expecting, thankfully. I think initially young people who were already digitally connected fared better than most people in their 30s and 40s who may have experienced a lot more isolation. We know that suicide rates, that for middle-aged men, 45 to 55, that's a high point. That's a spike point in the demographics for completed suicides. But we have seen some changes. We do know that prior to COVID, 1 in 10 teenagers in Ontario would admit to having felt suicidal within the last year. That's gone up. We've seen it's about the latest information coming out of CAMH, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, is that 1 in 5 teenagers admits to feeling completely overwhelmed by the pandemic.
Wow. Yeah.
And one of the scariest statistics actually has to do with the LGBTQ plus youth community. 1 in 3 kids who identify as LGBTQ plus have attempted suicide in the last year.
Wow. It's a big
number.
number.
Yeah, we knew that was high already.
Yeah.
We knew that was the most at-risk and vulnerable demographic, but that's the demographic we've seen a visible spike in suicide attempts in the last 2 years.
It's interesting to me that you said people that were already digitally connected seem to be at a lower risk of a more serious outcome. That's a summarization, but that sounds like about what you said. If I'm wrong, please let me know. Why do you think that's the case? Is it because younger demographics, know where to find help easier? Is it because the culture is turning to a place where this is just something that we're talking about more, and usually early adopters are teens anyways? Is it kind of a combination of those things? What does that look like? And then I guess on the flip side, those demographics that are at most risk, what do we do there? How does that, like, how do you get to those demographics that are at a higher risk point, even maybe because it's just not what they grew up with, or they don't have the tools?
Yeah, like we have been created for relationship. That's not a surprise to anyone that's in ministry. That is, we're taught that as someone who's been in ministry leadership for 10 years and as a pastor's kid. That translates very differently for those of us that are in ministry leadership. Sure. Is we tend not to be in good peer-to-peer relationships, especially as we start to get older. And the one thing that we've really seen play out during the pandemic is that relationships and personal connections are critically important to mental health and to well-being. Um, we know that for people that are at risk of suicide, the number one determining factor as to whether or not they will follow through with a suicide comes down to the connecting points that they have, the quality of the relationships that are around them.
Hmm.
That makes all of the difference between whether someone goes through with suicide or not. And the same, I think, is true like as we journey through this pandemic, is that those who have been able to find ways to connect, to share hurt, struggle, pain with one another, they have done better. Those who have not been able to have really struggled and felt hurt and isolated and alone. And so I think initially teenagers have been very well connected online. Initially, they did better, I think, in the first 6 months because they were already connected online, while the rest of us were still figuring it out. I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years, like we really don't know the impacts of this pandemic on mental health, especially on young people's mental health. The benefit that you and I have is that we've been through hurt and struggle before, if not quite like this. We have the context and the skills, hopefully, to know here's how I get through challenge. Here's how I get through struggle. These are the people, the places, the practices, the rituals that I go to process my pain and my hurt. Teenagers often don't have that yet. And for those that started in grade 9, they're looking at a third year of graduations with no graduation ceremony, no prom. These rites of passage that we look forward to and are deeply meaningful in our sense of transitioning from adolescence to adulthood, our sense of identity, that has really been changed and disrupted. And so I think really what we're going to see 10, 20 years down the road is then we're going to start to understand the long-term impacts of the isolation and the trauma of these 2 years on people and on young people in particular.
Right. So what can we do now? What are some of the things that either people can be aware of, things that they can say or not say? You know, like you said, we're not going to know the full impact for a while, but using the things that we know about suicide and mental health now, what are some of the things that you're teaching? Right, hashtag Hope isn't an organization that just gets up and sells sweaters, right? You go around and you are a resource. You do workshops, you get into churches and places and actually teach this stuff, right? So, you know, I'll circle back to that in a second and make sure people know how to get to hold of you and bring you in. But, you know, what are some of the insights that you bring of things that we can be doing now to at least sort of mitigate the risk or the damage?
I think the first thing that is critically important is to spend time grieving. This is something that we as a church and as evangelicals in particular are not good at. Protestants don't know how to grieve and mourn and cry. We often tend to be suspicious of, you know, like stuff coming out of Ignatian spirituality and you know, the joy of the Lord is our strength, right? But one of the reasons I love the Psalms and some of the harder parts of Scripture, like parts of Isaiah and Lamentations and the book of Job, you know, it's funny how often believers turn to the book of Job in the midst of pain, even though it's such a discouraging book for the most part. Yeah. There is something in that grieving and mourning experience which is super critical and crucial to be able to process pain. Right. And I don't think that's something that we have done well. That's something that we focus on as hashtag Hope. When we set up in a bar or a music venue, we've got a big sign, 8x8-foot banner behind the table that says, "Death does not deserve you." There's a picture of a skull with a flower coming out, and that flower is the only piece that has color on it. And it's this instant starting point of conversation into a person's pain and their hardship and their desire to give up, to quit, to die, to no longer be here.
Hmm.
And I think that is the starting point, whether it's someone who is suicidal or someone who's just going through a hard time. We often, out of our own need to want to see people do better, we skip past their need to talk about their pain. And so that would be my first recommendation. This is what we always try to do with #Hope, is we give people a place to talk about, to express, to for a short time to live in their pain in a public way, in a shared way, with other people, so that we can walk alongside of them in that hurt, that there's a healing that comes in that shared experience of walking together through hardship. It's something we know, but we struggle to do because it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. We want to jump to the end of the story, of the healing, of the freedom, of the return of Jesus, of the good things. But we're not there yet. And so that's my first encouragement, is learn to walk well with people in pain and hardship, and to listen and to empathize. My second encouragement is to provide the kind of relational support that people need. Sometimes this will mean that I need to be uncomfortable and spend time with people that maybe I don't particularly want to spend time with.
Right.
That I don't naturally connect with. But I mean, this is the heart of the gospel. Like Jesus says, when you have a party, invite over those who can't repay the favor. Bring over, those that don't have a home, and those that are sick, and those who, are aliens and foreigners. Those are not friend categories.
Right. Yeah,
for most of us. And so it means that if we are serious about following the calling of Jesus, that we need to be willing to step out of our offices and spend time with people who are hurting. But sometimes that can't be us. A lot of what we do is we kind of show up and we share our story and we tell people that there is hope, and then we leave. One of the things that we try to do when we do that is to make local connections. Where are the resources within that community that are already there, that we can point people towards, so that they don't just hear an encouraging story and then go home and feel alone and unsupported.
Right. That's great. I love that, because there's no reason to. You don't need to be the hero to everybody in every moment or every situation, but if you're the door that points people towards something else, that's really great too. One question I had for you, sorry, this one just popped up and I apologize if you're not ready for it. What are some ways right now do you think that maybe people can get sort of triggered or can get put in a bad spot that people like us we're doing unintentionally? So I think of this example, a mutual friend of ours or acquaintance. I don't know if you would call me a friend, probably not, but Brett Allman. We were chatting once about this, and he said, if you know Brett, you know his story, and if you don't, I don't think that his story is open. All of his speeches, talks, presentations he does now sitting down, because of something that happened to him quite a while ago. And so for him, when a church, worship person says, stand up and sing with us, or then sit down and stand up, and that's actually a lot for some people, the need to, and not just him, but other people that he's talked to as well, like this need to move around. And so he has kind of said, something that can really trigger people is stop saying, can you
Hmm.
just stand with us? And then when the one or two people don't stand because they can't, they're even full of maybe more anxiety than they weren't. Is there something that you're seeing that you see people do, see people say that maybe we're not thinking about, that we should really sort of change our approach, um, uh, and just maybe put it in our mind a little bit more often?
Hmm.
I tried to
Yeah, I'll
vamp
give.
there for a minute to
Yeah,
give you a
yeah.
to get.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I'll give you a pet peeve, and then I'll give you some more helpful
Awesome, that's great.
something
That's
that's
what
more
we're looking
helpful.
for.
Um, One of my pet peeves is when people talk about their OCD, and I put
About
that in
their OCD.
quotations if you're listening on the podcast.
Okay.
Because like people often talk about like, oh well, I do this thing that is organized because of my OCD. OCD
Right.
stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. I have a friend who has OCD,
Right.
and her obsessions and her compulsions are deeply, deeply debilitating. That's led to many, many suicide attempts, and severe anxiety. And so it's, for me, knowing that, it's very frustrating to hear people make such light, pithy comments about a very severe mental illness. Needing to line things up in a certain order is not OCD. That's, being anal, or,
Right.
just being particular. That's not because you have a severe anxiety disorder that debilitates your ability to do a lot of things in your life.
Sure.
And so that's something I would like us to just stop using. And the reason why is not to be politically correct, but because by speaking of it in that way, it minimizes the pain of the people that are living through that.
Hmm.
And this kind of leads into my bigger point of like, we can't avoid triggering people. Or, like, you can't eliminate that from your life. Like, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to say things. We're going to not know people's backstory and make a comment that we don't know is going to be hurtful.
Right.
And I think the forward momentum of like growing in our character and our concern for other people, is to be able to move to a place, and this is hard for me in certain contexts, to move away from being defensive in that situation, and
Right.
to recognize that even in spite of no ill intent, our words have caused hurt and harm to other people.
Right.
And so I think the answer to that is twofold. First, to be quick to apologize, knowing that our righteousness is in Jesus, not in our performance anyway, and so that ego shouldn't get in the way, but it does, but it shouldn't.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
But second is, and this is really something I've learned as a Youth for Christ worker that I think my coworkers do really well, is to learn to develop an eye and an ear for people that are on the edges.
Mm.
And so whether this is like becoming more aware of abuse issues, or of, things regarding residential schools and indigenous issues, or, the struggles being faced by people in the LGBTQ plus community, or, the struggles of people with mental illness, is this is a learning and growing journey of discovering, where are people hurting, where is there injustice, and how can we adjust our behavior, again, not to be politically correct, to gain more, favor, prestige, or approval from the world, but how do we adjust our behavior so that we are aware of, those that are on the outside, that those who have not been invited to the banquet table, those who don't feel that they are able to approach, the throne of God. regardless of people's perspective on the meeting house in Bruxy Cavey, one of the things I've really appreciated from them is every winter they take the month of February to focus intentionally on a demographic or a portion of people that are not well served by the church. And last year in February 2021, they did 4 weeks focusing on people with physical disabilities and their interaction and experience of church. And so they explored having interpreters and subtitles and invited those people to the table to have conversations and to listen to them about why it was hard for them to engage with the typical Sunday service. So one of them gave an example of having a son with some significant disabilities, some mental disabilities, and it basically meant that they couldn't attend church for years because of the unpredictability of his behavior, and he knew that and how hard of a struggle that was for the family and how separated they felt from community. And I think it's important for us to set aside time and to be intentional about listening to those members of our community, about hearing their needs and their struggles, so that we can do everything we can and ask the question. I forget who said this, but it's not me. What does love demand of us? Right. Ask that question. What does love demand of us so that we can lay down our lives and serve those who are hurting within our communities?
Mm-hmm. There you go. So what are you guys up to? What is #Hope doing? How are you? So you mentioned, when we set up in a bar or a restaurant, so that or a club, so that's interesting to me. So you can dip into that just for a second, because that's got me curious. But how are you helping Christian organizations or churches, or really any organization, schools? How are you helping them out? And then how can you help, if there's a church that is short in this area, which a lot of us are, can people bring you in, that sort of thing? How does that all work?
Yeah, the primary focus on our ministry is on speaking and advocacy, as well as on some training as well. And so either Nick or I, or both of us, we will go in and speak in different venues. In a music venue, it tends to be like spoken word, or just having a visible presence. I'll tell you a story about that in a moment. Okay. But sometimes in schools, it's classrooms or assemblies as more of a motivational speaker. We also do like youth groups, or like a Sunday morning service even. Conferences, we do a little bit of workshopping. And so there is really where we start to lean into some of the training that we do. I used to teach the ASSIST course, which is sort of the gold standard of suicide intervention. It's a 2-day, 15-hour course. I've since transitioned from doing that to doing a 2 or 3 hour training for volunteers. So this is not a certification course of any kind, but it's an introduction for those that are not likely to go, or just you don't have the financial resources to send 20 volunteers to go and take a $100 course. Is that I'll come in and I'll share a little bit, an introduction to how do you approach a conversation with someone that you suspect may be suicidal? What are some basic things that you can do if someone is struggling with depression, or struggling with anxiety, or experiencing a panic attack? And so it's very basic. It's just what are some practical tools that ordinary people can use to start to engage in these kind of conversations? And then we encourage and connect people to, if you are a caregiver regularly to someone at risk, to continue to pursue more education and training. Particularly in bars and music venues. That's been a really unique ministry for us. Nick has a background in the heavy metal scene. He was part of a post-hardcore band a number of years ago. And,
I didn't know that about him. That's funny.
Yeah. I used to have dreadlocks that were down past my shoulders, or both into the metal scene. and a white guy with dreadlocks usually doesn't look good. uh, but so often Nick in particular gets invited by a band to go on tour or to show up at a music venue. Sometimes he's given opportunities to do some spoken word at the beginning of or partway through a set. And then we set up our table with that, that banner which says "Death does not deserve you," and people come over and they look at it, and it instantly connects with their pain. Particularly in the party scene, we've been to a couple of raves, so electronic music scene, and lots of young people are there, and they're using ecstasy or they're using cocaine usually. And so people are there because they're hurting and they want to forget and they want to feel good and forget about their pain for a little bit.
Yeah.
And the opportunity that we have is to say, yes, you are here, but let's also connect with that pain and talk about it, and to remind people, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. You are not alone in your hurt and your pain. And so that might be considered pre-evangelism. It's really an opportunity for us to love people and to open up a conversation with them about their hurt and their pain, and to trust and to pray that God would pick up on that at another point with them.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing that you go into those spaces, right? You just many church leaders just tensed up and got terrified of even the thought of some of, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. It is a little intimidating.
Yeah.
Standing across the table and having a guy who's like coked out of his brain telling you like, I want to give you money. Can you promise this all goes to charity?
Right. Right. But
really, really interesting.
Through those places, you're putting like you said before, you challenged some people to just, get uncomfortable with a conversation, but you guys are walking it. You're getting uncomfortable in your location. You're going,
Yep.
we're going to find out where people are and we're just going to get in there.
Yep. Yep.
Wow. So how can people tap into you? Where can they find you? So you do the training, you both come and you can do speaking or youth groups, where do people get a hold of you? How does that work? What does booking you look like and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the easiest way is to check us out on our website, #hope.ca. That's the word hashtag spelt out, .ca. Or through Instagram at #HopeCA, and I'll give you the links so you can throw those in the show notes.
For sure.
That's probably the easiest. You can reach out to me directly through email at mark@hope.ca.
Okay, that's awesome. Any last, we had a great conversation. I loved it. Maybe there's a question that you would have hoped that I would have asked or some place that you thought I should have left you. So last words, anything so encouraging to people or something that you feel like, if there's one thing everybody should leave with, maybe it's this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one question I get quite a bit is from people who have not lived with a mental illness. They haven't been severely depressed. They've never had a panic attack. They've never felt suicidal. And sometimes people will ask, like, how do I connect? I don't understand this. It's not personal to me. Because there is a very big difference. Like once you've been through that experience of just wanting to go home with Jesus and not be here and thinking about doing something about doing that. Once you've been through that, you can really connect with that sense of exhaustion and tiredness with people. But if you haven't been there, it's hard to understand that.
Sure.
And so I would say, like, there's a myth out there that you can't understand another person's experience. And I don't think that's entirely true. We can become better students of each other's experiences. And so my encouragement to you, if you're listening and you don't really know much about mental health, is ask questions of those around you. Ask if they're comfortable to have a conversation about their experience and that you'd like to learn from it. And listen well. Don't be afraid to, maybe ask some questions that you feel you don't know if it's the right question to ask or not, and learn from people's stories. Listen to people's stories, because as you do and as you walk alongside people that are hurting, I really believe that God will just soften your heart and increase your understanding of why people do what they do and the hurt and the pain that they've experienced. And that through that listening, through that relationship, that there is great opportunity for you to provide hope and encouragement for people that are hurting.
That's a good ending. That's as good a way to do it as any. Well, Mark, thanks so much for taking a few minutes with me today. Really appreciate it. We'll make sure we link everything down below. And hopefully some people start reaching out and start training their communities and their leaders in this area a little bit more. So thanks so much for everything you're doing. Thanks for your commitment to going into tough spaces and having tough conversations and really going all in and dedicating yourself into this. It's an incredible ministry, and I am very appreciative of it for sure. So thanks so much for doing that.
Thanks so much. Let me repeat that again. Thanks so much, Mike. It's been great to be on the show with you.
No problem. Okay, we'll talk to you later.
All right. See ya, Mike.
See ya.